Good morning. My family tells me that this is the way we now communicate at the start of the 21st century. And this document arrived through my front door this week, and it got me so angry that I thought I had to communicate the errors in it, or at least provide the information that it doesn't say. If we ever worried about Tony Blair issuing a dodgy dossier to go to war in Iraq, then this is certainly Dave Cameron's dodgy dossier, because he refers right the way at the front to a reformed EU, and he has done nothing of the sort. There will be no reformed EU without treaty change, and treaty change is a long way off, as you will discover as we go through this short video presentation. Now, the thing I want to talk to you about today is the democratic deficit in the European Union. Because this is singularly, well, of the two things, the other is it's the economy stupid, but it is singularly the most important thing. Let us look at how democracy takes place in the UK. What we have is we have the people that select a parliament. From the parliament we get a government, and from the government we get a civil servant, or the civil service. So what we can see is there is a direct relationship right the way through to the way that we are managed. And by us voting, we can remove the parliament, change the government, not change the civil servants, but we can change the policy of the civil servants. Now, one of the fundamental misconceptions that you will hear about is how important the European Court of Human Rights are and the European Court of Convention. There is nothing this side, in this block here, that has anything to do with the EU. You have to, in order to be a member of the EU, you have to sign up to this, but this is a completely separate convention, the Council of Europe, who is responsible for the European Convention on Human Rights, and in turn is responsible for the European Court of Human Rights. Now, there's no question that we are leaving that. You've certainly seen the former head of MI6 who has proposed that we should come out of that. But since there is accusations that MI5 and MI6 have been involved in extraordinary rendition, then the last thing that we want is to come out of that. And I can assure you that if there was any risk of us coming out of that, I would not be pointing out this democratic deficit. Now, in the EU, it really is, the powerhouse is with the European Union. However, let us just look at the European Court of Justice, because that's part of the structure of the European Union. It's comprising 28 members, so commonly throughout the European Union, each country gets to appoint one person. So the European Court of Justice has 28 judges. And slowly there's been a judicial coup d'etat whereby the rulings of this body have taken over and become the ruling body of the UK. Let me give you two prime examples of how that's happened. When the government was proposing the Maastricht Treaty, it agreed that it would not be involved in the social chapter. Therefore, it thought very comfortably that it wouldn't be involved in anything like the Working Time Directive. Whether you think the Working Time Directive is a good or bad thing, it's not relevant to this debate. What happened was that the UK government thought that the Working Time Directive had nothing to do with it because it was a part of the social chapter. So it went through the Council of Ministers, it went through the Parliament, and then the European Court of Justice came along and said, ho, ho, ho. No, well, in fact, the European Union took the UK to court in the European Court of Justice and said, ho, 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 this isn't under the social chapter, this is under health and safety. And therefore the European Court of Justice, another completely unelected body, with judges who have a system of law which is fundamentally different to ours, and I'll come back to that. These judges ruled that the UK had to comply with the Working Time Directive. Just dealing with that, we in this country have a basis of what is known as common law. It has been built up since 1215 and Magna Carta and has been established as a principle. That is not the same for the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe has been built on a basis of what is known as Roman law, which was then supplanted by or overtaken by the Napoleonic Code, which is basically, in this country, we have a principle that you can do anything if the law says you cannot. Whereas in Europe, you can only do something if the law says you can. And that is why you have a European Union Commission that is absolutely hell-bent on directives and regulation, because they do not believe that, because they come from a mental mindset, and this is 26 or 25 out of the 28 countries, come from a mindset which says that if something is not said that it can be done, then you have to presume that it is illegal. So we have a body of people here, unelected, whose legal basis is fundamentally different to our own. Now, let us just look at, they came up with a gender equality directive. The EU Commission came up with an gender equality directive. It was passed by the Council of Ministers. It was passed by the European Union. Now, and this then came to be interpreted by the European Court of Justice. What you have found is that in this country, women, they're not safer drivers, but what they do is when they have an accident, it costs far less. So it is sensible that women have cheaper car insurance. No, 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 says the European Court of Justice. That is entirely unreasonable and goes against the gender directive. So in this country, because of these 28 people here, or in fact the judges that ruled this, you now have a situation where women and men are charged the same for their car insurance, even though it makes no economic sense. Likewise, it's had the same in terms of annuities. So you have a man and a woman who have both saved the same amount of money. They are retiring, but because a woman lives longer, then she gets paid out each month a little bit less than a man. Well, that's what used to happen before these judges got involved and said, no, 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 right? Even though this is your personal saving pot, and it's your personal saving pot that is being insured and passed back to you over a period of time, no, 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 says these Court of Judges, men and women have got to be treated the same. So what you've got here is a completely barking set of rules. Now, let us look at the European Commission. This is the only body that can generate laws in the EU, right? It can't come from the people, it can't come from Parliament, as it does in the UK. These people sit and generate the laws. They send those laws or directives and proposals to the Council of the European Union. Some people know it as the Council of Ministers, right? And that's how I'll refer to it, the Council of Ministers. Now, the Council of Ministers is in fact made up of all the different groups. So agriculture, when you're discussing agriculture, it's made up of the UK's Minister of Agriculture. If you're talking about health, it's made up of the UK Minister of Health. Let's say you're talking about economics, it's made up of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It is this body, right, which first of all has to approve the laws. Now, let's just look at this. So this is one of 28 people that they've been elected. Remember, these EU Commission have not been elected, but these 28. Now, the voting here is very interesting because 55% of the votes, if 55% of the people here, of the ministers here, vote in favour, then it gets passed. But that's only if the proposal has come from the European Union. If the proposal comes from the Council of Ministers themselves, then it needs, I think it's a 72% majority in order for it to be passed. Now, why is that? So let's look at this. The EU Commission, the bureaucrats, those people that have been appointed, and can you tell me who is the current UK appointed commissioner? 1 in 1,000 people can't. You know, just think about, do you know the man that's representing you here? However, if it comes from here to here, that's all right, only 55% need to vote in favour. If it comes from here, oh no, we need 72%. So the democratically elected people need to have a higher majority to get something through its body than the unelected. Well, that is quite frankly bizarre. Now, what we have is, we also have a thing here which is qualified majority voting. About 75% of the legislation which comes from the EU Commission has to come by way of qualified majority voting. Now, that's a good thing. Except in this case, the UK has 8% of the votes. We're about 64.8 million people out of about 504 million people. We get about 8% of the votes. And 72 times out of 72 times we've been outvoted here, and the matter has gone through to Parliament. Let me just say one thing about this EU Commission. The EU Commissioners, when they are appointed, take an oath that they are not representing their own country, and that they are only going to seek they're only going to act in the best interest of the EU Commission. Absolutely laudable, absolutely right, and I am sure that the last 2 EU Commissioners that we've had, or in fact all of them, have applied with that rule. I can assure you, having tried quite extensively in Eastern Europe, that anybody who comes from that part of the world, who's appointed a commissioner here, knows that their job is to represent their country at the EU Commission. You know, they are taking the oath with their fingers crossed. So this thing's being rigged right from the start. And hey, and if you want to know about politics in the European Union, look at the Eurovision Song Contest. Let us now come to the European Parliament. Okay? The European Parliament cannot propose any legislation. It can't. Unlike here, this Parliament proposing legislation, all it can do is 2 things. The first thing it does is it approves the people that are being voted in the EU Commission. And how much we objected to Jean-Claude Juncker being appointed EU Commissioner here, you know, nothing was going to change. So they appoint the EU, they can approve. They can't appoint, they can only approve or reject the slate that's put forward by the EU Commission. Now the European Union, this is elected, the UK, we have 78 seats out of 751 seats on the European Union. Now, every country has a maximum of 6 seats, so the smallest countries have 6 seats, and the most that anybody can have, I think, is 96 seats. Don't quote me on that, but we have 78. So let's just look at that as to what it means for the European Union. So the UK, we have a population of 64.8 million people. We have 78 members of Parliament. So we get 1 MP for 830,000 people. 1 MP for 830,000 people. Malta, population 630,000, gets 6 MPs. Cyprus, population 563,000, gets 6 MPs. Luxembourg, population of 847,000, gets 6 MPs. So look at the democratic deficit here. The UK, 830,000 people per 1 MP. Malta, 72,000. Cyprus, 93,000. Luxembourg, 141,000. How is it that we are ever going to be fairly represented in the European Union? Now, let's just, I'm sorry to quote the European Port Directive, because it's come from, it's one of the ones that Daniel Hanna of the Leave campaign constantly quotes, and I really don't like to be associated with them because they keep quoting wrong statistics. But the European Port Directive, most of the ports in Northern Europe are state-owned, and therefore, since they are competing with each other and since there is an element of state subsidy, it seems eminently sensible that there should be some kind of directive dealing with state-owned ports. One has no argument with that, except in the UK we don't have state-owned ports. We have privately owned ports. And therefore the EU directive should have nothing to do with the port directive, which basically says we're going to add to your costs because we're going to insist that you outsource everything, which is a bizarre way. So every one of the UK members of Parliament, every one of the UK's MEPs voted against the port directive, right? Every one, because it was harmful to the UK port business, and in fact was going to increase the price of imports and exports. So it was actually positively harmful to our business. Every one of our guys voted against it here. These people, the EU Commission, couldn't give a toss, right, about it, and we'll come to why they couldn't give a toss because of the way the whole thing is structured, and so this has come into law. Now, under this EU Commission, there's a whole body of civil servants, of which we have the comitology committees, a word that has been created only in the European Union, and they are committees that are designed to study any particular issue and therefore design and develop and create the regulations. Comitology, a committee of technology, is basically where it comes from. Now, these committees are absolutely lobby fodder for big business and for the NGOs, people like the World Wildlife Fund, Oxfam, the European Trade Union Congress. They all lobby these people like mad, and so does big business. The banks, the pharmaceutical companies, everybody lobbies these people, and they come up with the directives. And what you find is, and then those directives move forward. Have you ever wondered now why you cannot buy the same size vitamins, or why you can't have your health supplements that you used to be able to buy in the shops? Something which I understand Prince Charles got quite angry. Well, it's very simply that these comitology committees, the one dealing with pharmaceuticals, was lobbied hugely by Big Pharma. The small companies, didn't know it was going on, and if they did know it was going on, damn well couldn't get there, because it costs a fortune to go to Brussels and find your way through the system. I think there are 23,000 lobbying firms, 2,500 NGOs with a permanent basis. What chance do you think the little guy has of dealing with this comitology committee? They don't. So it is big and powerful business that's vested in here, that forces, that designs the directives that the EU commissions, that it comes down on the rest of us. It is quite frankly impossible for any individual to change the law in Europe. I set about trying. I got very angry about VAT, and let's just talk about VAT. The reason that the UK government cannot deal with the tampons tax is it's because it's dealt with by the European Commission. There is no way that any individual can get to the UK Commission. In fact, the UK government couldn't persuade the European Commission to change the rules on sanitary products. So until we were coming to a referendum, the government went to the Commission and said, hey, this is really bad news. Half the population are against you because you're taxing them. And then the UK Commission said, oh, yes, we'll concede it on this damn occasion. Why is it? Please tell me, why is it that we're having to go to a bunch of unelected people, right, to get the law changed to fairly treat 50% of our population? This is completely and utterly barking. However, let's go back to the comitology committees. Hey, do you know, I've just realised the nice thing about videos is if I was having this conversation in the pub, you'd have to turn me off. Or you'd have to listen to me. At least now you can turn me off. But let's go back to the comitology committee. So these comitology committees, what then happens is that the European Commission is giving grants to people like, as I say, the World Wildlife Fund, Oxfam, a whole junk of them, in order that they influence the comitology committees, that influence the EU Commission, that then comes down to the laws. So these people, which are charities and you are giving your money to, are being paid by the Commission to prove that there's a democratic reason why they should legislate in the first place. Have you seen anything so bizarre? Now you're probably noticing that there is one thing missed off this map that I haven't referred to. Now, if you've got through all the names, you know, the Council of Europe, the European Court of Justice, the Council of the European Union, we now have the final body called the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe actually has no powers at all. However, there was no place where the heads of state could meet. And so they've set up the Council of Europe, and this just comprises the heads of state. And it has only an advisory role in the whole thing. So even your Prime Minister, right, love him or hate him, even your Prime Minister has no power in this whole structure. So when it comes to voting on I think it's the 23rd of June, just think whether you'd like to go back to a system whereby the people appoint Parliament and allow us to run ourselves, or you want to go to this system over here, which is singularly the most complex democratic system on earth, which is responsible now for 75% of the laws in this country. Whether you want to continue with that. That's the decision that you have to make on the 23rd of June. Do you want to continue with a democratic deficit, or do you want to go back to ruling ourselves? Thank you for listening.